Good evening, everyone. We continue our study in the book of Isaiah. We are now in chapter 32. Now, again, need to remind all of us that the book of Isaiah doesn't flow in a chronological order, which means that one chapter doesn't necessarily follow another chapter. And each chapter has a very particular prophecy that is set. And much of the book of Isaiah and within the prophecies are using very poetic language. And as such, we need to be careful that it is with the imagery that the message is carried out and not very literally by the text itself. And so it paints the picture so that we understand the message behind it. Now, in chapter 32, the first verse basically underscores the theme of the chapter. And so in this verse, we begin, it says, Behold, look. Basically, look. A king will reign in righteousness, and princes or chiefs will rule with justice. Now, again, we must see this as an A and a B. And these words here, righteousness and justice, we need to actually understand this a little bit more. Now, this word is tzedek, and the word for justice is mishpat. These are very two key words in the scripture itself. The idea of reign and rule basically is to take authority. There are two groups of people here. One is the Melech, which is the king. The other is the princess. Now it's translated as princess. This would be Sarim, a Sar. A Sar really would be a leader, the leaders, the ministers, if you like. So let's break this apart because this is an important verse that provides a backdrop to the entire chapter. With all the judgment of God coming, the intent that God wants to paint is number one. Yesterday we saw the character of God. And today we will see very clearly what God demands of his people. So this is the character that God expects. And this is the character God expects of the king, the leaders, and all of these will have consequence to the people and to the land, to the cities and to the temple. That would be the backdrop. And so God is painting this first point here, the character that God expects. And he says, Zedek and Mishpat. Now, Zedek and Mishpat is this. Both are expected of the king and the leaders. It's just written in a poetic style. And basically, God is expecting this so that you can't actually look only at the king. You have to also look at the leaders, and the king cannot be the only one like that. And he needs to distribute and empower his leaders to be the same. And so that's the principle that God wants from Israel to manage herself. Now, obviously, as time goes on, people will see this description when a king is righteous, Zedek, then you find peace will reign in the land. The people will begin to see God. And because the king is displaying the character of God. So, what is righteousness? Is often translated as righteousness And I think we should then understand the the idea here is to do what is right before God. So Sedek, do right by God. And what does God expect when you do right by God is to treat the people rightly, and especially the poor, the weak, the needy. And so one of the interesting expression of Sedek is that God expects his people to take care of those who can't take care of themselves. Those who can is expected to join in to help out those who can't. Now, the theme throughout the prophet books is to scold the people that they have forgotten tzedek. They've forgotten to do righteousness. Oftentimes people think of righteousness like is like no doing charity, not exactly doing charity. You're not giving alms for the sake of giving alms or giving donations for the sake of giving donations. The idea here that God wants to impress upon the king and the leaders and obviously those in power would be to do right by God, to protect those who can't protect themselves, those who are in need, to do what is right, and that would be right by God. And so righteousness or tzedek would be to take care of the poor, the needy, and the weak. What about mishpat then? Mishpat would be in terms of justice. So let me just put it down here. Mishpat is about justice, is to do what is just and what is fair. And this is also to the people, especially these type of people who can't defend themselves. And so understand that the backdrop of chapter 32 is God's demand on the king and the leaders to rule, to take authority without biasness, towards the rich and powerful, and without biasness against the poor, the weak, and the needy, both in terms of tzedek and in terms of mishpat. When it comes to justice, it needs to be delivered, especially to those who can't defend themselves. Now, one of those that I forgot to mention would be widows, right? Widows and the fatherless. And oftentimes you see all these words repeating itself, and I think we should get the picture by now. In verse 2, it says, when this happens, it will be like a man in a hiding place from the wind. He is like a cover from the storm, the tempest. He will be like rivers of water in a dry place. He will be like a shadow of a great rock in a hot and dry land. All of these is a picture A, B, C, and D. The picture here is that when there is righteousness, tzedek, and there is justice, mishpat, the people will always be seeing this as a very comfortable place, a safe haven, a place of protection, a place where a person will be fed, there will be shelter. That would be the idea in verse 2. As it goes on to verse 3, it seems that when there is tzedek and mishpat, the eyes of those who see will not be dimmed. Now, the idea of dim here, I guess we could say that they will not be, how should we say it? They No, I guess you can say that the eyes that the eyes of those who can see will not be dim, be sealed. They would not be closed. Now, this is a contrast. It means that when there is no righteousness and justice, then the eyes of those who see are dimmed, are sealed, are closed, which means that they can't see truth when there is no righteousness and justice. So in verse 3, it describes that when there is this character in the land with the people in authority, the opposite will happen. It says that the ears of those who hear will listen. And this word listen here will be attentive. I guess you could say that uh, in verse 3 will be attentive. They can hear again, right? They will pay attention and pay attention to God's words and God's warnings. I think that would be a way of saying it, no? So then you can see the ears of those who hear, they will now listen. Now, what is the situation when there is no Tzedek and Mishpat? They will not listen. So, what you see in verse 3 is that when the environment is right with Tzedek and Mishpat, then people who have eyes now can see. They were closed before. People who have ears who refuse to listen will pay attention. Then it says here, the heart of the rash will understand knowledge. Previously, they will not regard knowledge. The tongue of the stammerers will be ready to speak plainly. Those who are rapidly speaking and people don't understand them, now they can speak clearly. So you can see that verse 3 and verse 4 paints result, the result or the what we can say the consequences when the leaders have righteousness and justice, people will begin to pay attention to God. Verse 5. Well, the word verse 5 here starts with the foolish. The idea of foolish literally is vile. The vile person will no longer be called generous. The miser will not be called bountiful or what should we call noble or magnanimous. Now, what does that mean? It means this: when there is no tzedek, when there is no mishpat, the vile person is actually called generous. The miser, the guy who doesn't help anyone, is said to be very noble, very magnanimous. Now, what does that mean? It means that people are starting to turn the truth into something that is not. They are painting a picture of the opposite of what the person really is. And in those situations, you find that there is no mishpat, there is no tzedek. The entire community and society is turned upside down because people are starting to redefine what is good by the bad. So you call bad good, you call evil good, and that becomes a big issue to God. Verse 6, the foolish or vile person will speak foolishness or villainy. So a vile person is a villain, right? Basically that. He speaks villainly. His heart works iniquity. His heart means his actions. his will, his decision, whatever he does, is actually about, in this case, would be Avon. They would twist the law for their purpose. They practice, well, this word ungodliness, I think we can say um, hypocrisy, right? Hypocrisy. And then it says to speak error against God, to speak not just error, but lies against Jehovah. And this is serious because it has gone from a simple set of sins to something really grievous. And then to keep the hungry unsatisfied, uh, meaning not feeding those who need to be fed, and it will cause the drink of the thirsty to fail. So basically, not helping those who need help. And so this is a description of the society when there is no tzedek and no mishpat. And it goes on in verse 7. He says, and the schemes of the schemer are evil. The idea of evil here, uh, now the schemer, I guess you can say in verse 7, the deceitful person, right? The deceitful person, it is evil. Now, the idea of evil here is ra, but it's in the plural. So, evil or evils, right? And remember, it's always seen in the eyes of the beholder. It's evil in the eyes of the people that they are dealing with. He plans wicked plans. The intent is to destroy the poor with false words. And then, even when the needy speaks justice, the idea of making a plea. What is important is people who are poor, people who are needy, they do not get mishpat. They come and seek justice, but people will bend the law and they will be judged against, and no justice will come to the poor because people lie against the poor. The rich can say anything they want, and that becomes the truth, that set of truth that will oppress the poor and needy. Now, I'm just trying to show you what the text says, that when the society has no tzedek and no mishpat, especially at leadership, the king and leaders, the entire society falls into chaos. But a generous man devises generous things, and by generosity he shall stand. The idea of generosity is generous deeds. He shall stand, he shall be counted, he shall be recognized, I guess you can say, to be recognized. Now, this is a contrast. I just want to point out to you. When there is no tzedek and mishpat, all of these things will happen and the society will turn inside out, upside down. But a generous person, a person who is willing, I guess you could say, the generous is somebody who is willing, voluntarily extending, uh, extending help, especially to people like these, right? The poor, the weak, the needy, the widow, the fatherless. Here, the poor and needy. And these are generous. And when we say generous, it also implies that he is able. It's not just that he is willing, but he is also able. And he doesn't join those who are corrupted in the ways of society. Verse 9 begins to speak about women. Say, rise up, you women who are complacent. Hear my voice, you complacent daughters. Now, this word complacent here should mean confident. Not complacent, right? Confident, where you can put confidence in something. So by themselves, they have confidence. Give ear to my speech. So this idea of woman comes in two forms, the understanding. In many cases, people will look at this as literal women and say, why are women and daughters being discussed here? So remember, in poetic language, we can actually see this women as towns and cities, right? And these are in the feminine. In the Hebrew words, towns and cities are in the feminine, and they are usually used in an illustration as women and daughters. And now it begins here. In those towns and cities, you think that everything is fine and you don't see the enemies coming. Hear my speech. So, hear literally means to hear the sound. And this word, give ear, is also to listen. And it is to, I guess, it has a very interesting image. It's to broaden the ear. No, pull your ear out to listen, to hear properly, right? To hear properly. What is going to happen is this: there will be a time coming when it is going to be terrible. So if you think everything is fine, think again. That is what's coming in verse 10. In a year and some days, you will be troubled, you complacent women, for the vintage will fail, the gathering will not come. Now, in verse 10, it says that when you look at this, there will be no harvest. The vintage of the grapes, it won't happen. And then it says, tremble, you who are at ease, be troubled, you complacent ones, still dealing with this, and this. So these will be the cities and the towns. And notice it uses feminine words to describe what the cities are to do. Strip yourselves, make yourselves bare, and gird yourselves on your ways. And it says, be prepared to be undressed. Now, this is not literally to the women, but this is be prepared to lose everything. And this is the way that is being described. In verse 12, it says, people shall mourn upon their breasts. Still talking about these women, but I think a bit of translation is needed, right? They shall beat upon their breasts, lamenting. This is a picture of lament, of mourning. And in the uh, Oriental way, they actually beat their chests. And so when we're talking about the women, then it is to beat their breasts. And this is not for, but over the pleasant fields for the fruitful vine, because the pleasant fields and the fruitful vines will not have harvest, because the vintage will fail, the ingathering will not come. It says, on the land of my people will come up thorns and thistles. Yes, on all the happy homes that is now there in the joyous cities, things will happen and you won't like it. You think that all will remain the same. There'll be harvest, there'll be joy, but not true. It says, because the palace will be forsaken. Now, verse 14 uh, is not palaces, but it's palace. They will be abandoned. So that's the time that is being described. The bustling city will be deserted. The forts and towers will become lairs forever. Lairs means ruin. But this word forever is ad olam. Ad olam means until a long time. We don't know how long, but it's a long time. Now, this may paint a picture of not just the Hezekiah period, but actually in the Zedekiah period, where all the Zedek and the Mishpat has gone out of the window. This will happen where there will be abandonment of the palace, the city, the forts, the tower, and they will be ruined. And once they are ruined, it would be a joy for wild donkeys and a pasture of flocks, because the animals will be happy to graze. And it says here, until, this is important, until. Now, this is not the spirit. So let me just change this. Until a spirit is poured upon us from on high. I think this would be a better way. And then we have, and then the wilderness will become fruitful field. And then the fruitful field is counted as a forest. What does that mean? This means that up to here, it is a picture that's drawn that there will be a time that everything will be in exile. Judah, Jerusalem, all that will be deserted until a spirit, and this would be a spirit or a wind of God's favor will come back. And this would be at a time where God says it's time to go home. And we are told in the book of Jeremiah that there will be 70 years in exile. And so it will be for a long time. But when the time comes, God will bring about the return, and whatever is deserted, whatever there is in the fields, they will become fruitful again. They'll be as a forest. This picture here is God is telling them one day, even when you don't realize it, all this will be gone, because when there's no Tzedek, there's no Mishpat, that will be the time after Hezekiah and after Josiah. And then the last few kings will drive the nation to her knees, and Babylon will come. Verse 16. Then would be and then. When God pours out a spirit upon them, and at that time, the people will realize that this is the favor of God upon them. They will come back to the land, and there will be mishpat, will dwell in the wilderness, and tzedek or tzedakah is the same root. Tzedakah will remain. So if you recall, this is the background of verse 1. It is very much about the mishpat and the tzedek or the tzedakah. And God is saying they will come upon in time. Don't know when, but and then when God pours out a spirit upon them and the land becomes good again, and then Mishpat will sit in the wilderness and Tzedekah will sit and will sit in the fruitful field. Now we see in verse 17 the work of righteousness or the deed. The deed of tzedakah will be shalom. And the effect of righteousness, and this would be tzedakah, of righteousness, the effect of righteousness will be quietness and assurance forever. Now, what does that mean? The effect of righteousness will be confidence. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. There will be a sense of confidence in God. There will be a, oh, sorry. Let me just move back a bit. Sorry. The first one here will be at peace, will be in tranquility, will be undisturbed. And I think you could understand this as shakat, to be at repose, to be at rest, where there will be no disturbances from other people. The second one, assurance, will be confidence, because God is back in control. And this will be for a long time. And then God says, my people will dwell in a peaceful pasture, peaceful habitation. Peaceful is shalom, a complete place of rest. In secure dwellings and in quiet resting places. Now, all this is actually to say quietness and assurance, secure and quiet resting places is the result where you've got tzedakah at work. Though hail comes down on the forest and the city is brought low in humiliation, uh, I guess you could say that in verse 19, the idea here is although there will be hail that will come down on the forest, the city is brought. I guess you can. It doesn't really mean the city will be brought low. Let me see. We could actually translate this. The city will extend downwards. I think would be This word brought low as extend below. So city is usually on a hill, and so the city will expand below. And then this word humiliation, I think we can look at this. This is not humiliation. Uh, the city will be brought to a low place. Low place. And so this would be the valley. This is a low place. This would be a better explanation and not about humiliation and brought low. This is where God, in a more poetic language, the the that will God will bring down. It's not though, this will be he shall hail down. He shall hail down on the forest, and the city will extend to the low place. Now, what does this mean? Let me try to explain this way. God brings judgment upon the illustration of the forest in verse 19. And the idea that people would think of this would be people who are wicked. And that's how the Jewish people would think, anyways. I'm just sharing with you that God will bring judgment down upon the wicked, and the city, which is the Jewish nation, the Israel, will expand, will expand, and this is expand instead. So I guess they are trying to show us that as God comes, God will take care of the people. And no matter what other people do to them, God will always extend or expand their horizons. I think that would be a way of looking at verse 19. Bit more problematic in the translation. Verse 20 says, you will be fortunate. Blessed is fortunate or happy. And you get to sow besides the water, who sent out freely the feet of the ox and donkey. Now, what this would mean is that there will be good fortune in everything they do. Now, why would this be a more preferred interpretation? Is because we see this here, that God is talking about my people. And when God talks about my people, all of these will be interpreted for God's people, Israel. And that's the reason why the more poetic language is leaning towards the people of God, which would be Israel. And so basically, God is saying, when the justice is seen and when righteousness is seen, there will be shalom. And shalom is described in this manner. Shalom means completeness, by the way. And in that form of completeness, God describes this as a tranquil, undisturbed place. People won't disturb them, and they will have confidence to live in peace for a long time. Now, at times, many Jewish interpreters will look at this as the final messianic age. And so, what we have seen is God's intent for chapter 32 is very much to look at the character of Mishpat and the character of Zedekiah, both of which is what God expects of his people, and I would say by extension to all people, including ourselves today. And it is important for us to understand that God expects his people who are able, who are leaders, not to mistreat all those, but to take care of them. That's why throughout the five books of Moses, the Torah, as well as all the prophet books, the complaint against Israel, the northern kingdom, and the southern kingdom, Judah, is very much about their mistreatment of the poor, the weak, the needy, the widow, and the fatherless. And God punishes them for it. For all other crimes, there will be the Torah that will determine the way that the punishment and the judgment is made. But when the people mistreat or misuse justice, there is no law. And God will then take upon himself to impose judgment and discipline upon the people when things get out of hand. And with this, we come to the end of chapter 32.